Hi sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name's Beth. If you're new, welcome. This beautiful baby quilt is all quilted and ready to go, and after filming this video I was able to give it to the new moms, so it's no longer in my possession, but it's such a pretty quilt. So I'm going to share today how I quilted it and put the binding on and all of those details that need to happen after you make a quilt top. So here's my backing. I found this cotton sheet at the thrift store, and the colors go really well with the quilt top, so I'm going to make my quilt sandwich. I cut a piece of batting just a little bit bigger than the quilt top, and now I'm going to put it all together. The sheet was quite a bit bigger than my quilt top, so I just put the 3 layers together, and here I'm cutting away the excess sheet. I'm using some 505 spray. So I rolled the quilt top away a little bit. I'm starting sort of in the middle, and I'll spray just a little bit of that 505 on my batting, and then I'll smooth the quilt top on top of the batting, and I will do the same thing for the backing. I'm going to free motion some sort of curvy waves onto my quilt, and I need this quilting foot, so I'm switching out the all-purpose foot for this quilting foot, and I will lower my feed dogs, and here's the blue thread that I'll be using. I have white thread on the bottom. And before I do anything, I always like to just give a little test run on some scrap fabric and batting to make sure that the tension and everything is working correctly. Before I start quilting, I thought I'd show you what the design looks like. I'm starting here in the middle, and it looks sort of like an ocean wave, and I do a large circle and then I curve it around, leaving enough space to go back to the inside of that curve or that circle, and I will just work around the quilt. It does not need to be a curve every time, like there you saw a really long line, and it's a very forgiving pattern that I'll be using on my quilt. Here's that design on the quilt top, and trying to show you the quilting lines, and they show up a little bit better on the back, but a very forgiving free motion quilting design that I like to use once in a while on my quilts. Here's my binding fabric, just a simple light blue fabric, cotton fabric. I'm going to trim the edge there to get a straight edge, and I will cut my strips 2.5 inches wide, the width of the fabric. I needed to change that foot on my sewing machine from the quilting foot to the all-purpose foot so that I can join my strips together for my binding. I lay the two strips together, right sides together, and at sort of a right angle, and then I sew a stitch from corner to corner. And with this fabric that doesn't have a right or a wrong side, it's a little bit tricky to remember which is your right side. So you do need to be careful with that when using solid that has both sides that are exactly the same. So after you put that seam in there, cut off those triangles, and after I have my long piece of binding ready to go, I will press it all in half. I'm going to attach the binding to the back of my quilt, leaving about 10 inches, a tail of about 10 inches, and I will begin just putting the raw edges together and sewing it down onto the back. And when I get to the corner, I will stop about a quarter inch away from the corner. With my needle down, I'm going to turn my quilt so that I can sew that tiny little bit off the corner, and you can see that tiny seam that is at an angle that I went off the corner of the quilt. Now I'm going to lift my binding up and down so that there's a fold right there on the top, and I will begin sewing the next side right up there, right on that fold. I'm going to sew all the way around my quilt, adding that binding, but I'm going to stop about, again, 10 to 12 inches from where I started so that I can add a continuous binding. Here are my two tails left over, and I'm going to fold the one on the left right next to the edge of the tail on the right. Then I'm going to take a little bit of the excess binding that I had trimmed off, and I will measure 2.5 inches from that fold. You can use that little bit of binding, or you could use a ruler, and trim off the excess so that that little fold is exactly 2.5 inches from the edge. And now I'm going to put right sides together and join these just like I joined all of the strips when I was putting them together, sort of at a right angle. I'll pin these together and then sew from corner to corner. Before trimming off those triangles, I always like to check to make sure it fits on my quilt, and it does. So I pinned down the binding, and now I will sew up that last bit of binding, and my binding will be attached, and I can turn my quilt over and top stitch all the way around. I love the way this quilt turned out. It's really beautiful with all those soft blues and those pops of orange. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.